Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan Lenklaus. I'm the Director of Public Safety here at Esri and lead our disaster response program. And with you today is Jeff Barani, who's our technical lead for emergency management and also for the disaster response program. And we're going to be doing a couple things today. First, introducing you to the program for those of you who may not have experienced the disaster response program before. We'll also do a lot of sharing around lessons that we've learned both from an industry perspective and from a technology perspective in responding to COVID-19 that we hope you can apply towards the next crisis moving forward. And then we'll leave you just a bit of vision of how we move forward from here and get ready for the next event that's unfortunately on us already in many cases. So let's start by just talking about the program itself, a bit of context and history. For those that are familiar with Esri as a company, know that Jack and Laura founded us as an organization truly with a mission to make a difference in the world. We apply geographic thinking and use the tools of geographic information systems to help organizations solve some of the world's most difficult challenges and problems. You hear us talk a lot about things like climate change and how our technology allows us to integrate and bring data together from multiple organizations and to look for patterns and analysis in there that we would have never seen otherwise, using maps as a common frame of reference. And so this program, the disaster response program at Esri, is truly an extension of who we are as a company. It really is our way to contribute back to help you as organizations through some of the most difficult moments you may have ever experienced and help solve difficult challenges related to crises and disasters of all types and sizes. And that program provides kind of 4 key areas. So if you ever need assistance, know that we can help you with obviously access to ArcGIS software, so making sure that you have the right technology to implement solutions for your organization, to scale up if you have volunteers coming in or you need to bring additional people on board for a crisis or disaster. We can also help you configure workflows. So a good example could be, how do I take tools like Survey123 for ArcGIS and create a damage assessment workflow that allows you to do a structural assessment in the field in a disconnected environment after a flood or a hurricane, for example. And for many organizations, that may be really a familiar process, and for others, it may be something that you're being asked to do for the first time. And as a GS professional, you may not know exactly how to do that and move quickly into that process. And so our team is here to provide you with expertise and understanding of how to configure our tools and use solutions to quickly launch these workflows and get you moving. The third element that we really focus on is the idea of data. That's both Esri data that we contribute from our Living Atlas of the World, from our partners as well, who make data available during crisis and disasters. That can be everything from imagery or mobility data like we saw with COVID-19, as well as partners data that are out there, user community data, and making sure that we are connecting you and organizations together where we know there's opportunity to both share and collaborate around a problem, whether that's a crisis or a data set, to truly make sure that you are plugged into that chain and to really amplify your data and voice out there to make sure that others hear the good work that you're doing. And then finally, the main fourth pillar that we focus on is around tech support. That's making sure that your applications, your environment that you rely on to run operations scales and supports and functions as you expect it to, right? We understand that these are mission critical applications for responding to crisis and disasters. So we want to make sure that you have the tech support you need as well as to escalate those things to be ready to help you if something does go wrong. The easiest thing to remember, and if you don't pay attention anywhere beyond this part of the presentation this today on the side, look at esri.com/disaster. That is our website where you'll find a ton of resources related to different hazard types, but also where you can request assistance from us in time of need. You'll simply go to that website, you'll fill out a form, request one of those 4 key areas, then somebody from the team will respond back to you shortly to get you processed and move through the program as quick as we can. And that program is 24/7, so we have organizations around the world that request assistance of all types and sizes. So don't feel also that there's any crisis that's too big or too small or a certain type. We're there to support you with anything that you feel you need help with. Just know that we're there as a mechanism. So what we're talking about today is COVID-19. For us, 2020 started off pretty rushed. If we looked over the history of the program, more than 25 years of history, we actually have exceeded the amount of requests that we've had in that whole history of the program in just the last 111 days of activation as a program. And so we thought it would be a great time now to basically reflect a bit on those lessons that we learned. But before we do that, I want to give you context as to where those lessons are coming from. So I mentioned 111 days. That's as of 17 of June of the 2020. We had our first COVID request come into the program on February 3rd. We went to a full-scale activation of our entire team and across Esri with hundreds of folks in the organization coming in to solve and work to support you towards the end of February. And one of the main tipping points and things that I think many of you probably experienced or saw as an extension of the DRP was the announcement that Esri provided on March 19th, which is when Jack sent an email out to all of our users globally that was offering to support you in this pandemic by making a complimentary 6-month package of ArcGIS available to you. Now, we'll talk more about what that means shortly, but that actually then turned on a lot of other things inside of Esri as we brought more resources to bear to be able to support you and continue to iterate on solutions and ways that we can provide better support based on what we were hearing from users reach back to us as a result of that email. We also partnered a lot with organizations like domestically in the U.S. with the Federal Emergency Management Agency or FEMA, who was using their enterprise agreement to be able to connect governments together and to share information from a government perspective with each other. We work with the World Health Organization and the UN Statistics Division and Internet Development Bank and others to basically provide conduits into their communities as ways to seed capability at countries globally who are all focused on the singular mission of defeating the COVID-19 virus. We're still activated today, by the way, so just as we kind of talk about some of the lessons learned, we continue to have requests that are coming in and out. Just as a stamp in time, when we've got this on the 17th of June, we've got north of 4,000 organizations who reached out for support. We're approaching 5,000 pretty quick, but there's thousands more of organizations just like you out there in the world that are doing tremendous work. And so we don't want to miss the opportunity to say thank you and that we are so inspired by what you do to lead the way. Jeff and I have a unique perspective here at Esri in that we get to sit on the front lines of all sorts of crises and disasters with, leading Esri's response. COVID-19 is tremendous in the fact that it is you globally as a community coming together, leveraging the geospatial infrastructure of the world to respond to one singular event. That doesn't happen, right? It's usually a small region of the world who's faced with a crisis or a disaster. But the fact that we are literally working cross-sector between private organizations and government organizations and at multiple levels of government together, collaborating and sharing content, and even with nonprofit organizations and the like, really coming together, truly creating this mission that we have to make a difference and fight this disease together using GIS is tremendous. So I just want to recognize that. And that's you that work at the national government level, both in the defense space, but also looking at folks like FEMA and national government organizations focus on disaster risk reduction and other emergency management agencies, just doing a tremendous job of making your resources available, but also a space for the community to come together and collaborate and share learnings and share information and truly drive things forward. On the nonprofit sector side, looking at organizations like the American Red Cross, or looking at the International Association of Fire Chiefs, or volunteer organizations like GIS Corps, who are fighting the fight by helping crowdsource and collect testing site locations across the United States to make sure that residents know how to find a testing site and know what the status of that site is if they need to get tested. Those are a tremendous amount of work being done to put in their effort and time, not just to build the solution, but to connect into the community, to provide their services, and to resource that data and keep it active, because it is making a difference for individuals like myself and others who may need a testing site. If you look globally, so just for a minute, so I know we're based in the U.S. and we tend to talk a lot about U.S., but just internationally, as I mentioned, kind of this global geospatial infrastructure at play. I mean, there's great examples from around the world, and it would be too much time for us to be able to highlight all of your great work, but just a few examples from Australia and Rwanda and Ghana and India here on the screen, all using maps and analysis and applications to deliver a lot of complex information into kind of distillable dashboards that allow decision makers, but also just the public in these organizations and communities to really relate to what's happening right now in the pandemic. So just tremendous work there. So for those of you who are seeing that, you're thinking, man, I wish I would have known about the disaster response program. I need to continue the response or the reopening that we're going through with GIS, and I want to support that. I want to take a moment and just come back to that key moment of the COVID-19 activation for Esri when Jack sent that email out. That email indicated that we will offer to anybody around the world access to ArcGIS for 6 months. That includes access to ArcGIS Online, our SaaS platform that allows you to log in, to create maps, to ask questions of data, and to publish dashboards and applications like you just saw directly yourself. It also includes hubs, so ability to launch these sites that support community engagement. We'll talk more about that as we go this morning. Also looking at ArcGIS Insights, so for tools that are not for GIS professionals, but are for business intelligence officials who are looking at data from graphing and charting and pattern detection, using ArcGIS Insights as a new way to explore that data, to ask questions of it, and geographically understand the trends in new ways. And it's also the wealth of resources for solutions and tools that allow you to take all of that package and really start to configure it in really mission-specific ways to understand everything from capacity of your organization and the resources you need, about where to apply resources and so forth. So if you've not taken advantage of that, if you need any support, just know that you can go to esri.com/disaster, fill out the form, and we will certainly get in touch and help you through this process. Now, for those of you that are in the process of responding or reopening, I just want to point out the second main resource that we have available, which is the Esri COVID-19 GIS Hub. This is our ArcGIS Hub environment that provides you access to common applications like you see on the screen from Johns Hopkins University, really the situation room for the world, I would say. Everybody's familiar with the dashboard globally making it to the news, but also access to data from Esri's Living Atlas and our partner community on mobility and others, which we'll talk about, and other resources that allow you to understand how to configure tools, and for those that don't work daily in epidemiology and in public health, how to consider things like privacy and tracking and ethically using tools in these situations. And so that resource portal will open up the world to you in terms of these solutions. Our team mobilized collectively at Esri to listen to you and understand what you were asking for as you started the response. So we need ways to quickly map cases and to create dashboards that show trends and patterns in the community. We needed ways to understand as a private sector how our workforce is functioning and what's the capacity of our workforce to still deliver services through our businesses and storefronts, and how do we do that and so forth. And so that list that you see in the top left of COVID-19 solutions was driven by what we heard from you and continues to evolve and deliver functionality right now as we go into reopening and eventually longer term recovery. So if you're looking for a place to start, that hub is a great resource to start to look at those categories of response or business continuity or reopening, dig in, read a bit about a solution template, apply that to your environment or to reach out to the DRP, and then launch a tool into the market that'll help you quickly move forward. That's also the place for those resources. I mentioned, privacy in the case of looking at HIPAA, or, hey, I'm brand new to ArcGIS Insights, but I think there's an opportunity there with my epidemiology group to start to look at that. How do we use it? There are learning pathways that allow you to take advantage of that, or indoors and how you're looking at not just now as you go back to work and return to office and you're looking at things like social distancing measures, but as you look forward into sheltering needs for responding to other crises and disasters, how you might apply that technology to do, shelter management and the like. So great resources, great training, great guidance that you can lean into. Now, if you're attending this and you're not with a government organization or you're furloughed or you're a student, we also have software that we've made available to support you specifically. So students, you can go into ArcGIS, you can actually apply, get access to a full license, do training, do education, and apply it. And the same for those that are furloughed due to the economic conditions globally. You can apply, take advantage of ArcGIS to train and educate yourself and build your skills back up, or take new skills into the workforce as you go back. And for nonprofits and other users, certainly there's trying to reach as many of you as we can with tools and technology that help us all collectively move forward in the fight against COVID-19. Now, for those GIS professionals that are listening in, I want to make sure that you're familiar with GeoNet and know to take advantage of it. So it is a community space that we have across Esri that brings people together on common topics. COVID is no different. We launched a COVID-19 community inside of GeoNet that is a place for you to ask questions, for you to see what's new, to ask and contribute your expertise back into the conversation. So if you haven't joined GeoNet, please do. Certainly go and just search COVID-19 in the toolbar there for GeoNet. You'll find the community space and be a part of that conversation moving forward, because we're certainly not out of the woods, and we've got a lot of road in front of us as we continue on the fight for COVID-19. We'll continue to post resources there as well. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about that's the program. We got to where we are today. I want to talk a little bit about just trends and patterns that we've seen in the market. So these are lessons and questions and success stories that we have seen across those, almost 5,000 organizations that we've helped respond, but also just that we've heard from you through our community. And so I want to share first some industry insight, patterns that we think organizations will start to adopt, not just for COVID, but truly beyond COVID. And then Jeff's going to talk a bit about the technology and how we're seeing some things move in that front as well. So I've got 4 key observations across the industry that I want to share. The first is that you as an organization or as an individual, we have to be able to use data to anticipate where we're needed next. I think this seems somewhat obvious when you think about it from a GIS perspective, that where is everything to us. But for an emergency manager or from a public health official, certainly they are thinking things potentially differently, but they're going to come back to the question of asking you, well, where should we position a resource? Where do we need to evacuate somebody for a flood or a fire? So the idea of where, the element of place and location, is central to everything that we do. And COVID-19 really is no different in that aspect. In fact, I would say it's even more so at the center of everything that we need. When you get an alert or a warning for a flood forecast or a hurricane cone of uncertainty, it's something that you can easily recognize. It's a visible thing, but in the case of a virus, it is an invisible enemy. And so we need tools, and no better tool exists than GIS and maps to put a face on that invisible fight. My colleague, Esri, who's our chief medical officer, coined these kind of 5 steps to responding to COVID-19. And I really thought it was brilliant, because it goes beyond just mapping the cases where everybody thinks I'm going to put all the cases where I've seen positives on the map, but quickly progresses into modeling to understand what that means, where that disease is spreading in the community or has the potential to spread in the community. COVID-19 shows us that we need to anticipate more than ever. There are very limited resources for personal protective equipment and ventilators, hospital bed capacity and the like. And so knowing where that virus potentially might spread next and what that means in terms of taxing our resources is key to beating and sustaining our response. That's the same thing we would fight in a hurricane or a flood. We still need to understand the modeling that tells us where people are most at risk due to demographic characteristics or inequities that exist in a community that allow us to predict impacts against that population and infrastructure. And then where do we pre-position resources or apply limited resources in advance that we allocate it in the right way? This is all about helping your decision makers as GIS professionals, or you as an emergency management professional or public safety official, to understand what's in front of you, right? To size up the enemy, to understand how we predict where we best should put our resources and efforts behind, so that we're in front of the fight, not behind the fight. I think COVID-19 just shines a light on the value of this for organizations to go beyond just making basic maps to asking questions and modeling and understanding at all scales. And for those that work in GIS, this idea of using tools like ArcGIS to detect patterns and things like crime, or to look at hazard risk analysis and mitigation projects from a map perspective is not new. But certainly looking at prediction, like the curves you see on the screen here that are looking at bed capacity and the like, all the way to the right-hand side, is now that we understand where there's new patterns emerging, where we predict they're going to evolve to next, how do we actually assign and allocate resources effectively? And these are tools that we use every day as GIS professionals. Location allocation tells us we have a problem in the community. We can assign resources, and based on the demand that we see, allocate resources both geographically, bringing in the where component, but also apply the right amount of resources to build capacity into certain areas. This is what we do every day, and so I think COVID-19 just continues for me to highlight the fundamentals of GIS and expanding geographic thinking inside of organizations. So use this opportunity to drive that conversation home. The second thing I want to talk about is that, we certainly need our people as organizations, right, our colleagues to be sensors to tell us what they're experiencing now more than ever as they're all virtualized, right, and distributed across space, but also to have our connection into the community be there now as well. So we basically invoke those citizens and residents of our community as sensors to tell us what they're experiencing, what they're seeing, and what they're hearing that changes the way that we plan and the way that we operate. One of the early requests that we had was the fact that, just like Esri went virtual and we all completely went to work from home, just like Jeff and I are now, that's the same thing for all of us working in public safety. For the most part, many of you in operation centers went to a limited skeleton crew of a handful of people just to keep systems and lights on, but everybody else was virtually connecting in. So how do we understand what the impact of COVID-19 is on that workforce? Do we have enough people on deck to be able to surge when we need it? Do we need to find additional resources and bring mutual aid in based on the need that we see as an impact to our community? These are critical questions for any incident, and knowing what's the impact of that incident, whether I'm trying to mobilize my operations center for a hurricane and I want to know if my staff has been impacted or not, and do I have enough people to operate, or do I need to continue to reach out to neighboring jurisdictions and the like, for example? And that's key. And so the ability to connect to my workforce is one part of that. The second part of that is connecting into the community. And so, a great example of this, rather than me kind of talk to it, is looking at Cobb County, Georgia, who launched this grocery store survey dashboard. This was the fact that we had residents like myself living in Houston, going to the store and realizing that nothing was on the shelf that I needed, getting frustrated, coming back and complaining back to somebody else, saying, man, I wish they would have had that. I would have not gone out and exposed myself to it. So why not contribute, give me a voice in that conversation geographically? So they launched the grocery store inventory as a way to do that. So as people are moving through the system, they can take out their phone, they can talk about what they see in terms of hours of service, or there's special times a day for older population who shouldn't be exposed and have special shopping hours. What's on the shelf? Do they have paper goods or the like? And be able to bring that in and crowdsource a story, right? That the voice that I have and the frustration that I have or the excitement that I have when something's on the shelf comes through. And so as a public safety organization and emergency management, you want to make sure that you're providing your voice in that conversation, giving them a platform to connect into you so that you engage them in this process, because they're going to tell their own version of that story. We want to make sure that we're collecting that information, because that helps you then understand how you should start to share and change and modify your authoritative voice to address the concerns that you're hearing. And that leads to the third key observation, which is, you can't be a silent participant in this COVID-19 pandemic or in any response or crisis. You have to share information. Transparency builds trust. Your authoritative voice builds trust and drives action in the community. I think good examples of this abound, right? There's too many to highlight here, but one that I really like is just a simple example of San Bernardino County. This is, Esri's home county in Southern California, who's doing a tremendous job of using a dashboard to display a tremendous amount of information in discernible formats. So I'm looking at confirmed cases, the number recovered, what's the doubling time of the caseload over that, what's the trend line in terms of new cases and average cases and confirms. But you notice across the bottom, right, they also have multiple tabs where I'm looking at things like how many confirmed cases, the testing status, looking at hospital census for bed count, and ventilator status. So the community actually can see in real time what's happening around them, right? We all experience it and we all think that we know what's going on because we're isolated in our own experiences as residents. So maybe giving a voice in there and saying, hey, there's nothing in the grocery store, there's nothing there. If that store could respond back and say, yes, but we are restocking, we are putting our resources back into the community, we're increasing testing, and these are the test site locations and where you need to go. That's the dialogue that we're seeing be successful. And so thinking about how you do that well is important. And it goes beyond just creating great dashboards. That's certainly a key aspect of it to allow transparency and people to see trends. But I love these examples of using ArcGIS Hub from organizations that show things from like Fort Bend County or Polk County in Minnesota that are really delivering more than just a map. They're putting their voice, their narrative to the story to tell people what they're doing, why they're doing it, why they're implementing social distances or stay-at-home orders, and what the benefit of that is. And right now, I think in the midst of COVID-19, we've seen how this disease and the amount of time that it's taking, this long-running disaster, slow-moving crisis, is having an impact on the community. And so the more that we can communicate as organizations with our voice and listen to the community allows us to better implement programs or interventions that truly address the needs at hand, and maybe modify some of the way that we communicate to drive the change that we're hoping to turn the curve down in the case of COVID-19, or maybe to increase evacuation in the case of a wildfire or a flood. So having said those three leads me to the last one that I want to share, is that where we saw organizations take a lead forward and truly quickly pivot to this virtual working world of COVID-19 were those that embraced the idea of digitally transforming the way that they work, like moving from paper into digital processes, using the tools to augment the way they work and to really support the workflows, not to hinder the workflows. And so it leads us, idea of digital transformation allowing us to scale as we need to. So there's two examples of that I want to just highlight for a minute. The first is, using Johns Hopkins University as a great example, was the process they went through by which to create this. While it started with spreadsheets and aggregating data from multiple sources together, it quickly turned into a scale problem. How do we update this multiple times a day? How do we make sure that it scales so that we are getting numbers from more and more sources and aggregating and delivering the right intelligence, so to speak, into the map? And so they needed ways to digitally transform that from spreadsheets and workflows into scripts and tools that allow them to scale the process. That's just one good example of like going and thinking differently about not just using a spreadsheet or a paper process, but realizing that there's a need to take this to a different level, and that technology can help you if you think through and apply it to the process you have at hand. The second thing that I love about the Johns Hopkins story is that, this application quickly went viral in the community. So it started with, several hundred hits to several thousand hits, all the way up to the peak of 4 million hits an hour. That's like 1,000 per second, which is unbelievable. But the fact that they were digitally transforming and using software as a service, in this case ArcGIS Online, to correctly configure the feature services and the tools themselves, allow them to deliver an application at scale. This is what's needed, right, for those organizations just like yourselves that are putting your voice out there and telling your story. You want to make sure that voice remains, and you don't want that voice to fall apart because everybody is coming to see what your story is. And when you hit a sweet spot, like in this case of Johns Hopkins, the map's going to go viral. The application, the hub is going to go viral because everybody's looking for what you're trying to tell them. And so thinking about digital transformation is key. And this isn't going away, right? As we look right now at our headquarters office, the building I work in Redlands, this is the lobby. It's empty today. The operations center that we have next door, the experience center we've got, is empty today. This is what many of you are experiencing, right? Your operations are working, continue to work, not in the places we've always been, those buildings, the office, the computer I sit at, but truly back at home, and you're connected into, virtual operation centers. And I don't think that's going to change after COVID-19. In fact, I think we will see a continuation of more virtualized operations. And so digital transformation means you need a way to actually move your organization beyond paper, beyond maps, and beyond desktop and servers to truly cloud-based systems that allow you to bring people together geographically and to use these tools to scale your story and your messaging. So I'll leave you with this in terms of what I just shared, those 4 key tenets that I think will persist on beyond COVID-19 as we get to reopening and to recovery and continue on to the next crisis. I would say that, those 4 things are not that dissimilar to what we've experienced in historic events, natural hazards and the like. If you've attended a webinar with Jeff and I before for emergency management, we've talked several times about how we want organizations to think about building a foundation for response, right? It's about preparedness in terms of a digital transformation. And we look back over the history of the program for 25 years, and we've talked about, 6 key tenets that we want people to think about. These are questions that people ask us all the time to support them with on DRP. I need help understanding the impact of an incident. I need help deploying and estimating what resources I need. I need the ability to monitor changing conditions, and I need to put people in the field and listen to them and collect information around damage. And I need to brief all my partners and communicate with the public and media. Well, maps are at the center of this. The element of where and location intelligence is at the center of all of this. And so I think what I just discovered as Jeff and I were talking through this is that those four things that are just being exacerbated by COVID-19 and forcing us to look at the way we respond with a new lens actually tie in directly to this baseline of readiness. You need tools that help you maintain situational awareness. It's more than just creating dots on the map. It's about understanding and anticipating where to go next based on modeling and analysis. That's the understanding the potential impact. It's also tools that allow you to get people in the field and listen to them, both your staff and the workforce, but also to the community to use them as sensors to lead back in and whether that's conducting a damage assessment or just literally listening to capacity and needs of the community, all the way to managing the flow of public information from your authoritative voice outbound, making sure that your brand stays solid and that people recognize you as the leader in the community is key. And this is what enables the mission critical decisions you need every day to occur. And so what we want to leave you with is don't forget that there is a baseline here that even though COVID-19 is new, even though none of us have been through a pandemic at this level, and I would say all of us have never been through an incident of this magnitude and duration, the common lessons and tenets that we're coming back and keep getting reinforced are not that dissimilar from others. So what we're hoping is that you apply what you're experiencing now through COVID-19 and what we're talking about today to get ready for the next event and to build this system that allows you to be agile and be ready for the next pandemic, the next hurricane, or the next flood. So to do that, we're going to take a look now at some of the technology trends. So those are high-level tenets in place, and I'm going to transition over to Jeff. Let's take a look at how ArcGIS and technology is trending in the community as a result of COVID-19. And I think there's some great lessons here that you'll want to apply as well. So with that, I'm going to pause and turn it over to Jeff. Jeff, the floor is all yours.
Well, thanks, Ryan, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today during this session. Unfortunately, we can't be together here in San Diego, but obviously we take great pride in the fact that we can still kind of get together virtually kind of through this environment and through this on-demand session at the user conference this year. So as Ryan mentioned, I want to share some kind of observations from my side to see some kind of technology trends and what we observed through the community through the response to COVID-19. So here's kind of the list. We'll talk about the John Hopkins dashboard, traditional data management processes that didn't scale, new data sources that were leveraged, the value of Hub, a mobile-first design, infographics that we saw, agility, and then kind of finish it up with some thoughts on governance. So. Okay, the first thing that we want to talk about here is obviously the John Hopkins dashboard. It was obviously the most interesting dashboard in the world, inspiration for many. There were many times that folks were looking at the news and we saw the dashboard, and we heard stories from many of you saying, hey, now people know what I do based on the fact that the John Hopkins dashboard was on TV. So this was certainly kind of a big success from a technology perspective, and really an inspiration for many through its work. And Ryan was mentioning that earlier, and we were talking about that through the course of the presentation. But even today, I go back and I look at my dashboards that created previously before COVID-19, and I look at them differently now because I really do think that the John Hopkins dashboard really raised the bar for what dashboards can do. Now everyone's got stacked maps or stacked widgets as a part of their dashboard. There's a almost a new model and a higher bar that's been set by the results of all the great work done not only by John Hopkins but everyone kind of across the community, really raising the level of expectations of what good data, good dashboards, look like. I think a really important message that I want to convey as a part of this presentation is that the real power of the John Hopkins dashboard and others like it is really the data. It's really the data that is the star of the show, and it just is kind of showcased, in the dashboard. So I wanted to spend a few minutes here, talking about, what the John Hopkins folks did early on as a part of their process. I think we can all relate to unorganized data like this. This was the data sources that were driving the dashboards, early on. Unstructured situation reports that have good information in them, but may not be set up in a way to be able to operationalize that from a GIS perspective and bringing that in, very quickly. So as we think about, kind of moving forward and we think about how can we be better prepared for the next event, I think really getting a good handle on the data and the important data streams and kind of really getting the plumbing in place to allow the the data to flow into those dashboards to help us make, better decisions is, really key. And obviously this is just kind of one example from the John Hopkins side, but I think an important lesson, for all of us to kind of take away is really data's the key as a part of all of this. I want to share a couple of photos here from our friend Ed Harrell in Alabama. These are some things that he tweeted out, early on, and really, I think, really capture some of the frustration of the GIS community. And obviously, on the wall they wrote, no new spreadsheet. I appreciate that they went through a bit of a digital transformation in their policy, at least, and printed out a copy of this. But really, what this meant is that they it's important from a data management perspective to get out in front of it. I think this represents a typical challenge that many GIS analysts face in a lot of their work. As Ryan and I were kind of preparing for this, we look at our old lessons learned and see we had written down kind of paper processes that didn't scale. And I think what we saw in COVID-19 is we saw in many cases data management practices didn't scale. So I think many of you have experienced this. I think Paul Doherty talked about this when he was in New Zealand, but I think this was these pictures from Ed really kind of capture that sentiment very well. And many of you can probably relate to seeing tabular information that you may have been asked to keep updated on a regular basis, and that could present challenges with schema changes and overriding the data and all that. And many of you talk to us about how you modernize that approach with things like Crowdsource Manager, Crowdsource Reporter, and basically change the data editing environment to be a spreadsheet that was kind of disconnected from everywhere else to be in a centralized location through ArcGIS Online, and others could very simply keep this information up to date. And this was really a mechanism to deputize additional GIS staff to support operations to really kind of fuel and keep those dashboards up to date with a great data, and doing that in a very effective way, actually taking the main GIS analysts or managers out of the data flow and really deputizing more staff to help keep that common operational picture or situational awareness viewers up to date. Now, this concept of operationalizing, data, in some cases extended to Excel macros. So we worked, the team at Esri worked with various others in the community to take, some of the great modeling information and surge models that were out there and take the macros that are inside of an Excel spreadsheet and operationalize that into a set of GIS tools that could be run, very quickly and very effectively to, capture a lot of that great logic that's been, pulled together by data scientists and the like, but make it more, actionable even here from a GIS perspective by extending it into this environment. Now, with every disaster, everyone's looking for the right, data. And, sometimes we may not be able to find that, flood polygon or the data, the key data sets that we need to make decisions, are not something that actually exists and that we have our hands on. And one of the interesting things that we observed through the course of COVID-19 is many new data sources and data providers were leveraged with great success. This could be things like, maybe traditional billing data that now can actually have great insight to support the response from COVID-19, or the ability from mobile devices to be captured in a variety of different formats to give indicators of not only kind of mobility but actually movement in the community. So it gives us a sense of where these measures may be working or not from a social distancing perspective. So obviously a couple of here on the screen that were critically important: the social distancing indicators from Unicast, from Facebook for Good, the SafeGraph weekly patterns data. Blue Dot also provided data. You may have seen this on TV through 60 Minutes. We saw other partners step up to the plate and provide great data sets like Definitive Healthcare, early on sharing bed capacity and ICU capacity based on their kind of normal data, or MCH supplying school closure data in a GIS format early on. So these were not normal for us from the GIS for emergency management perspective, but were critically important to help provide additional intelligence, actionable information through the response for COVID-19. As Ryan already mentioned, there were many hub sites that were stood up during the course of COVID-19. It was, simply inspiring on the Esri side to see literally the thousands of hub sites that were stood up, across the community. Not at a local level, at a state level, at a federal level, but as Ryan mentioned, many hub sites stood up across the globe, from the example from Indonesia on the bottom left there to Somalia and Europe, and really kind of across the globe. So there's many great examples to learn from. In the United States, obviously FEMA, and that was used to help provide coordination to the U.S. response. So these are indexed in several different locations. Obviously, the Esri hub site links to a lot of these. On the hub product pages, they have a specific gallery for the COVID-19 hub sites that were stood up. And as the hub site, like the hub team likes to say, you can find your hubspiration by looking what some of these others were doing. Now, one of the things that I wanted to share here from a lessons learned perspective, and I think this really is a key thing from our perspective, is these hubs really bridge the gap between official sites of information that may have data and guidance and all that type of thing, and really kind of help marry that with the data and apps that the GIS community can is providing, or was providing, or continues to provide. And Hub really helps put that information in context. That's the way that I like to think of it. I've heard some of other kind of colleagues talk about it. And even if we step back and look at this from the disaster response perspective, traditionally for large events, we'd stand up, ArcGIS Online groups for apps and data that we thought were important, that were being put across in the community. And now being able to put that in context within a hub site, provide a narrative, provide more kind of detailed, information, and really kind of hone that message was, critically important. And obviously we did this from the Esri side, but as we mentioned, we saw many of you do the same thing and really help unite your organizations and have people work together from the communication staff or public information officer staff to kind of pull this information in a technical way through the use of Hub. Another key thing from a technology perspective is the need for mobile-first design was certainly validated. This may not be news to many of you. I think there's certainly all sorts of statistics out there that say the majority of traffic to government websites are from, mobile browsers. So from a lessons learned perspective, it's really important to think about how can we make sure that we have a mobile-first approach in designing the apps and data sets and hub sites for our community, making sure the dashboards have a mobile-friendly version that automatically switch even just simple things like testing your hub sites on a mobile device to make sure that they work. Really moving forward, key lesson learned is to make sure we have a mobile-first design in place, and something I hope that you take with you as you work to get prepared for your next disaster or crisis. Another key, observation from the team is the rise of GIS-based infographics. So Business Analysts Online, for example, it can generate, GIS-based infographics, and we saw this, a wealth of explosion of these kind of across the community, combining demographics information, icons and the like to really kind of paint and kind of tell a story. And I think also this helped raise the bar even for, operations dashboards that were more infographic-like in their approach. And so this idea of GIS-based infographics, I think, is really important, moving forward, and the community as a whole has raised expectations of what senior-level decision-making products, might look like. And even things like the new operations dashboard takes, infographics and icons even further. So moving forward, there's even more we can do as a community to provide this type of approach and format. from talking to many of you and seeing the great work across the community, we really saw great agility and utility of the tools. And what we mean by that is things like, Survey 123 being, stood up, very quickly to support, new missions or new workflows. Obviously, our solutions team did, great and heroic work to make a lot of, resources available quickly to the community through Survey 123 and, other apps. But we heard many stories from you across the community and using the technology in new ways and doing that in a very agile fashion, whether that's a firefighter in Illinois using Survey 123 to log temperatures of firefighters and have that done over time and being able to see that on a dashboard, or have private businesses or big box stores use the ArcGIS platform to, even at the front door, understand who's coming in and who's going out of a building, and being able to log that over time and also report that back to a centralized, location. So many stories of agility and utility across the platform that were really inspirational to us to see its use across the community and the value that it provided. I would also like to say that we saw the GIS community work together, like never before. This was the first disaster where all 50 states in the United States had to declare a disaster. They're all 10 FEMA regions, kind of working together. And we heard so many stories of the communities, working together. From a technical perspective, in many cases, the technical manifestation of their coordination strategy may be partly based around having common ArcGIS Online groups to share non-public data in a secure way between counties and cities and states and regions and across, kind of the community. So that's been a function that's been in ArcGIS Online, for some time. And even many of you are probably members of multiple COVID-19, sharing groups. And so you had to work to make sure to name those that, as appropriate. And even some of you reported hitting limits of the number of groups that you could be kind of members of. So this is just obviously from a technology perspective, having these common groups, and sometimes even, hubs stood up to have private, context to what's, going on kind of across the community. So, really, I'm in admiration of the community in terms of the way that that you all have worked together. And I know that you'll be better prepared to face the next crisis, as a result of your lessons learned and really war stories of working together for this crisis. Kentucky, is a great example of this, and I really like their approach of, highlighting the different cabinet agencies all working, together here and in a team approach, kind of across the community. And this is just one of many stories that we're hearing from the community of that, collaboration, happening. Just a couple of things here in closing. I think also we saw, a lot of kind of the governance and ArcGIS Online kind of best practices messages that we shared over the years, really come forth and shown the need from a hub perspective as well. And this can just be like little things like filling out the item details properly, and having a good thumbnail and a good owner and that type of thing. Because really where this came forth and became apparent is on hub sites where, okay, there's the thumbnail that you set in the items details page and the good description there. So the point here is to really think about, Hub now as an extension of some of your ArcGIS Online, kind of best practices and how you could be prepared for that, into the next event. And as you're kind of hopefully as you get a chance to take a breath and think about, preparation, think about governance and preparing for that next event, maybe actually having to have a mechanism to bring in others to support you in your long days in the EOC, some kind of things to think about there as a part of that process. So again, just to kind of recap the lessons learned here, again, the key to the John Hopkins success and many of the dashboards that were stood up there, I think, was really the data and getting that in place in the first early on. And so we saw several examples of that. The value of Hub, the value of mobile-first design. I'd encourage you to think about how you might leverage GIS-based infographics in your work, moving forward, and hopefully have some new ideas to be more agile, with the platform to support the ever-changing needs from emergency management, public safety, disaster response, community. So with that, that concludes what I wanted to share with you today from a technical lessons learned perspective. And so we'll turn it back over to Ryan.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. Good job on the technical side. I think there's a tremendous amount of resources here that I hope you're taking away from just thinking about moving forward. And so that's where we want to end. I want to take a moment to say, there's a unique opportunity, I think, in front of all of us. The fact that we have made new connections, we have found new ways to approach problems as a result of COVID-19, that we have this opportunity to truly think about how we are prepared for the next crisis. And it doesn't matter if you're working in government or in business, if you're an organization working at the grassroots level. This is all about how we can start to apply this geographic thinking to build resilience in our community, and ultimately connect all of us together. I like that, Jeff and I both kind of positioned on purpose a slide that showed the geospatial infrastructure at work. It really was about connecting all of us together and the scale at which we're all working together to support this COVID-19 pandemic. And that truly is the spirit of where we're headed. And I would say that now is the time that we need to make change. For those that work in emergency management, public safety, we do after action reports. We sit down and we talk about the lessons that we learn and how we're going to apply those moving forward. And so I want to challenge you that now is the time. Even if you're still in the response phase and looking at reopening, now is the time to be thinking forward about how you're going to apply those quick lessons learned and take advantage of the momentum that you may have in the organization to make some changes. And I would say that the lessons that we've shared today from an industry perspective and really from a technology perspective are indicative of what we look back historically on key milestone events. These are rightfully big events in my mind and milestones. 1994 was the first time the disaster response program sent people in the field, and we learned about the need to build more self-reliant communities and organizations and build local capabilities, all the way to 9/11, where we learned about information sharing and supporting data exchange, and Katrina, where we needed better national preparedness and cross-sector coordination, all the way to Arab Spring is another key one, where we looked at the fact that the crowd is truly a powerful voice, right? And we've talked about that today in the context of COVID. And even just recently, the Camp Fire in California, where public communications are critical and the need to provide context to those messages using maps, there's one way to do that. And certainly then looking beyond just traditional measures of planning purposes and metrics, but looking at the demographics and the equity that exist or inequalities that exist inside of our communities is key. And so if we think about all of those aspects and we think about past events and we apply to COVID, I would ask the question, does COVID-19 change the cycle that we're in? No. In fact, I think it just points out the fact that we need to prepare for the next crisis. We need to think about now, while we're in the response phase, the lessons that we are learning, right? How we're executing and overcoming challenges in new ways, and how we're going to get into eventually a recovery and reopening phase that moves us forward and builds on the future, right? Just like I left you with, the virtualization of our operation centers is not going to change, right? How do we evolve and improve that? And then as we continue around the emergency management cycle, we're starting to look at ways that we can mitigate or eliminate, negative impacts from floods and hurricanes and fires. But, that's also time to mitigate your deficiencies in the digital transformation and looking at technology so that we're back into preparedness and we're truly looking at new vulnerabilities and the vision that you've got to move forward with a shared understanding of how geography and how GIS can truly get us ready for the next thing that comes online, because it's not going away, right? Natural disasters are upon us. It's hurricane season in the U.S., certainly looking at wildfire season starting earlier, but we're in the midst of a social uprising that's ongoing around racial inequality, looking at climate change, which is the big, massive overhang around us globally, is truly on us. And so the wheel continues to spin, the cycle continues to spin, and it's on us, each of us, to take these lessons learned, to take advantage of the new relationships that you've built between your public health officials and emergency managers, between maybe new partners in GIS that you've just now met and appreciate the tool that they brought to the table, and you want to take advantage of that. New patterns of technology and how you apply that through hubs and the like, or new solutions like the workforce capacity. How could you apply that to understanding how your workforce is impacted during any other crisis or disaster? And the momentum, right? The fact that you truly have an opportunity where Now, because more than ever, even though people are tired, even though we're burned out in many cases from the hours and the days of working in our virtual EOCs and responding, there is a sense of urgency to get ready for the next thing. And the next thing, the next disaster, the next crisis is going to be directly impacted and change the way we think as a result of COVID-19. Sheltering, social distancing, new allocation of shelters, those just simple examples that come to mind that tell us now's the time to apply geographic thinking to create better resilience for your organization and the way you scale and transform, but also to be ready to interconnect with your neighbors and share that critical information that we move forward. Because the next crisis is here. I think 2020 has been tough for all of us, certainly with COVID-19 and the potential wave 2 that's underway, certainly looking at the wildfires and hurricanes, the social unrest. No matter where you exist in the world, the next crisis is coming. And I think it's on each of us to take the action steps that we've learned here to think about how we can apply them locally. And truly, you may have different lessons learned that you've experienced with your GIS implementation and tools. So apply that thinking, move forward, get ready for the next crisis as you go forward. From there, I would just leave you with a thought. This quote comes out of the C40 cities. It's an aggregation of communities globally, mayors that come together to address all sorts of issues globally. But the fifth thing they pointed out is about recovery specific to COVID-19. And it really speaks to this idea that we need to build our GIS resilience. The recovery must improve the resilience of our cities and communities. Investment should be made to protect against future threats, including climate crisis, and support the people impacted by climate and health. I mean, this is the charge we all have, is to keep the wheel turning and be ready for the next thing. And so thank you for joining us. If you have any questions at all, if you ever need support, you want to talk about how you take the next step on the wheel and get ready to implement solutions, reach us out anytime, esri.com/disaster. Reach out to the team, send an email. We'd love to connect. So with that, thanks for attending. Appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.